afternoon. Welcome back to another exciting episode of In the Stacks by the Sea. And here we are at the Waccamaw Library, part of the Georgetown County Library System here in beautiful South Carolina. It's a lovely day on January 16th, bright and sunny outside. And we're here with Ray McManus, great South Carolinian, great poet as well. And he's brought some sunshine inside our library walls. Ray has established himself as one of the strong emerging voices of the rough South. His poems often speak to the darker side of experience in the semi-rural and sometimes repressive South. Hard work, hard love, hard drinking, hard words. Yet this darkness is often broken with humor or quirky turns. And images of rough Southern life are entwined with the haunting presence of Ireland in McManus's verse, drawn from his family history. He is the author of 3 poetry books so far: Punch, Red Dirt Jesus, and Driving Through the Country Before You're Born. And all of those are excellent, and you just, even from the titles, you can hear, you just want to read straight through them all. And it's just, you just sink your teeth right into those. He's a gritty writer, and you just want more. He's also the co-editor of this great anthology, Found Anew, and it's all based on our wonderful South Caroliniana Library archives. Just went through there and had fellow South Carolina writers dig out some great items and write about them. Ray is professor of English at the University of South Carolina Sumter, the Fire Ants, and he's a fiery persona himself. He is writer in residence for the Columbia Museum of Art and does some great programming there, and chair of the Board of Governors for the South Carolina Academy of Authors, and I've worn my jacket with the South Carolina Academy of Authors insignia on it. Ray does not wear jackets, but he is the chair, and we assume if he wore his pen, he would probably wear it through his ear or through his nose hole. But that's how Ray rolls. But he's a great representative for the arts in South Carolina. So here we are, Lexington County native Ray McManus. Great man, great poet, great friend. First question, do you mind if I call you Frey?
I don't mind at all. Call me Frey.
Okay.
Danage.
Okay. Fair enough. And that name kind of fits because as you note, and you noted in your poems too, you were often in the fray growing up.
Sure.
You were not a stranger to trouble.
No.
So, as you say, with a mischievous laugh. And you grew up, your working class family. You talked about how your dad built your house with his own hands, and it's, never got done being built, always working on it. But work is so important to your work. How did a kid who was always in and out of trouble, stirring things up, how did that kid become a poet?
Oh, wow. That's a good question, Dan. I think where work comes into play, very early on, when I was, 13, 14 years old, working with a tree crew or, doing floor covering, or later on working in a grocery store. I worked for a lot of different guys, and some were really, really good guys, and some not so much. But they all kind of had the same kind of attitude about them when it came to work, and that's you don't get paid extra for double work. So if you don't do it right the first time, you're going to have to redo it. And now you're cutting into your own money, because they're not going to pay me an extra $1 an hour to do work that I should have done right the first time. So early on, I kind of learned the value of trying to do it right the first time. Now, most of the guys that I worked for, especially the rougher ones, you know, they lived rough, they looked rough, but their work was impeccable. And so I learned the value of, you know, allowing my work to speak for me. You know, I mean, I could don a suit and tie and say all the right things, but I don't do either of those. I rarely say all the right things, but my work, to me, is what makes a statement for me. And it got me in trouble, and still gets me in trouble sometimes. My mouth primarily, but the way I look sometimes can, you know, someone could have the wrong impression, you know, and I love that. I love it when people have the wrong impression, because then I can go in and prove them wrong. And you know, where I grew up, that was a sort of a fuel, if you will, because, you know, I wasn't into sports. I had, you know, long hair or a mohawk or something. You know, I looked like your typical troublemaking kid. And so when a teacher would think that that's who I was, then, and it took me a while to figure this out, that it was better to try to prove them wrong through my work. Unfortunately, I didn't learn that aspect in school until I had gotten well into college. But the secret to all of it, really, what got me into writing poetry, really all started in 10th grade when a teacher walked into the boys' room and happened to be the only one there. Place is full of smoke because that's what, you know, kids did in there, you know. But I wasn't smoking a cigarette. I was actually, you know, using the restroom for its intended purposes. And I believe Miss Bickley was her name. She was brave enough. She would just storm in. She had a walk to her, you know. Yeah. And she stormed in and she said, "Mr. McManus, what do you have in your hand?" And I think she thought it was a cigarette, and it wasn't. And so I, in a limited vocabulary, told her what I had in my hand, and that sent me into in-school suspension. And when I was in in-school suspension, we were supposed to, you know, it was in a library. Had books at a table, and we had to read the books and write little one-page synopses for every book we read. And that was supposed to fill up our day. And books were like Jacques Cousteau, Motocross, you know, How to Repair a Tractor, you know, rural South Carolina. And but there was a book called Sound and Sense. And I started thumbing through that, and poets that I should have read at that point had never heard of, but I fell in love immediately with the language. In fact, I was thinking more innocently of, wow, these would make really cool lyrics for the band that me and my buddies were going to form once we learned how to play musical instruments. And so I loved that book so much, I stole it. And you know, took it with me, kept it for 25 years. When Punch came out, one of the teachers from my old high school reached out to me and asked if I'd come and talk to the students. And so I brought the book back, signed a little note in it, you know, that I stole this book 25 years ago. It saved my life. And I gave it to the librarian, who obviously was not the same librarian, and she took it and cried. And that touched me. Believe it or not, it took all of that to kind of make peace with where I grew up, and so it all is interconnected in weird kind of ways. But I can definitively say that I was not destined to be a poet. There were no, you know, my father and my mother were not writers, weren't poets. We didn't have books of poetry in our house. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. You know, so you know, it was. In an odd way, stealing poetry saved my life. So steal it. Steal as much as you can. Yeah. You heard it from me, kids.
Yeah. And I mean, that's T.S. Eliot, you know, what's the old saw that poets, good, what is it? Good poets.
Amateur poets borrow.
Borrow.
Good poets steal.
Good poets steal, you know, and that's coming from T.S. Eliot. So, you know, steal steal words, steal from other poets, but you know, you can also steal a book, or you can come to the library, the public library. You don't have to steal.
That is correct. You can check it
borrow.
out.
Check it out. So that's a plug for libraries, which you know, that's another way to do it. But you know, Ray McManus has his own style. But
I don't steal them anymore.
It worked
Just for
out.
the record.
He doesn't steal anymore. It worked out, and so that's in work. You know, that value, and and craftsmanship that even the people you were working with growing up, rough exterior, but they allowed their work to speak for them, and they had great craftsmanship, and that's what you work in different materials, the words, but it's great craftsmanship that speaks for you. So that's a great backstory and inspiring, I think, to a lot of folks out there.
I hope so.
And so you're giving back to the state. And you know, how about that? I think that speaks to what you are, maybe as a Southern writer and a South Carolina writer a bit. What about the Irish side, or the Gaelic roots? What would you say? How does that kind of figure into your poetry?
You want to know about my drinking habits?
Yeah,
and,
that's
that I like to cuss.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny, you know. In the South, you know, the Irish connection that a lot of Southerners have is strained. You know, my family had been in South Carolina before there was ever a country here, so to know really our story was difficult, because I would get bits and pieces from my dad, I'd get bits and pieces from maybe an uncle or a grandfather. And it wasn't until after my granddad had died that I really started to become interested in, like, where was our family from? And I'd heard a lot of different things, you know, like, oh, well, we're Scots, Irish, or stuff like that. And come to find out we're not. Our family comes from Enniskillen in County Fermanagh, which is a border county, and not Scots-Irish at all. And so when I started to trace from there to here, what really sort of was fascinating to me was how much Irish heritage is in the South, and different types of Irish heritage is in the South, with the Catholic Irish, Protestant Irish, Scots Irish, Irish that came over in the 1700s, Irish that came over in the middle of the 1800s, you know, with the famine/starvation. But for me, it helped me to understand a lot more about who I am and how my family operates. The penchant for storytelling. Yes, I do like to drink, you know, a little bit, you know, a little bit, just a little bit. And you know, and the hot-blooded, you know, sort of passion that you know, I get fired up, and whether I'm lecturing to students or writing. But you know, it helped me to understand too a lot more about the relationships within my family, how my dad operates and why he, you know, does the things that he does that didn't make any sense to me when I was growing up. And some of this would be just sort of a cultural history that was passed down, you know, that by finding those roots, I was able to make some sense of it, you know.
Yeah. And that's, you know, I'm Scots-Irish and Scots and Irish as well. So you know, there's like a war going on inside all the time.
I can tell. I can see it in your eyes.
It's atrocities on all sides. Nobody's winning. You see it. So I've got, but you know, it's funny how you know, what you announce is, you know, the kind of the key elements of Irishness can also, you know, that can be applied to just, I guess, Celticness or Gaelicness in general.
Sure.
But like, you know, the penchant for storytelling, the hot-temperedness, maybe some broodingness, moodiness, the drinking. If we didn't cover that, you know, you just trade Guinness for Scotch or something, or you know, but they also kind of meld together with Southernness in some ways.
Absolutely.
You know, and so, but there is that history, as you noted, long history in the South of Irish folks coming over and Scottish folks coming over, and Irish and Scottish and all mixed together. So those are all very, very interesting kind of connections and intersections that show up in your work all the time. And it's just fascinating stuff. But we don't like to check neat boxes or throw people in boxes. It's stereotyping, but sometimes it does kind of help us make sense of relatives, and you're saying it does kind of help you read your dad, and kind of help me make a lot of sense of my Uncle Dave, for example, and sometimes myself. And,
so sometimes
it works.
It's a complicated identity, and so is Southern identity. You know, and I think that embracing the complexities of that is really what is, because yes, there are some moments where it absolutely is stereotypical, and then there's some that are absolute opposite of the stereotypes that you've heard, and yet they all seem to fit. But I think for me too, growing up, I grew up in Lexington County, but I always felt like I was a little different growing up from a lot of the other guys that I grew up with. And it wasn't until I got a little older and started to realize, where my family was from, that I could understand just how, complex identity really is. That you can be in a place that you've lived in your entire life and be completely different from everybody else around you. And that's okay, and that's something to celebrate. And now, of course, and that was early on. That was in, early 90s, late 80s. Now, you see so many festivals and especially around St. Patrick's Day, and that really celebrates the Irish in the South. It doesn't necessarily involve just drinking green beer. Maybe when I was in college, that was certainly the draw. But now, it's the music, it's the stories, it's the history. And when I'm teaching my students, whether we're teaching Southern Lit or Irish Lit, there's bound to be crossover. And I think it's important for my students to be able to see that as well. So that, we're not as separated and divided as we, as social media may want to paint us, or the way we sort of read books and chapters, that we are all very similar, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Absolutely, that it's seen as, and I think that's the way it's presented in your work. Southernness and Irishness, not as they're not dividing categories. They're kind of ways of, they're inroads to connect, and lots of connections going on. So you kind of scramble those boxes together of identity, and kind of to turn back to something that I think was, in a lot of people's experience, poetry is seen as something that's something for it's something for the elites. It's something for, and that's through that somehow that got turned around in poetry's history. It seems like people like T.S. Eliot would be a kind of, that's seemed to be in some ways his view of it, that it's that was sort of divided off from the masses. But, and that's when you stole that book. This wasn't really for you. It wasn't for, you had to steal the fire away. But that's not necessarily true, is it? I mean, it shouldn't be that way. No,
it shouldn't. No one should have to steal a book of poetry to fall in love with it. Yeah, no. And I would say now. And especially now, again, late 80s, early 90s, just sort of finding my way, knowing that, the work that I was writing, or the work that I was doing would not necessarily be stuff that would fit in an elite journal somewhere. And so I kind of wore that chip. I like to have that chip, Kind of goes back to the old expression, you know, if you can't beat them, join them. And so I kind of look at it as, well, if you can't join them, beat them, you know. And so at first, when I first started writing, I really wasn't interested in place. You know, I wanted to write things that were going to, I don't know, shock people or make people, you know, generate some type of emotion. When I started writing about place, though, that's when really it helped me to understand that this is for me. And not just for me, but for everybody. Just like place isn't just for me, it's for everybody. And, you know, one of the things that I do when I'm talking with my students, if I teach like the poetry seminar, we always begin with Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, because I think the two of them as our sort of our great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother of modern and contemporary poetry, and very much about making poetry for the people. And to me, you know, when I'm reading, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about readers. I'm thinking about, you know, how can I relate this to, you know, to them, because I want them to come to the poem. I want them to come to poetry. I want them to have the same benefits I've had from it. When I go around and do workshops all over the state, and I work with, you know, kids that can barely write yet to, you know, senior citizens, and getting them to tell stories and getting them to, you know, write about mistakes, which is always fun with old people, get them to write about, you know, mistakes they've made, you know, and celebrate those things and embrace those things. And they find that poetry as an art can be a necessary tool, you know, to help them to navigate with a rather bizarre, complicated, complex world that we live in, and help them to situate, maybe it's just one thing to find some control in what seemingly seems to be out of control. And so getting more and more people interested in poetry, getting more and more people interested in seeing that they can write poems. I tell them all the time, like, look, if we can shoot a monkey into outer space and bring it back alive, you can write a poem without it killing you. And when I can get them to write, whether it's a short poem or a long poem, whatever, I can see in their face the feeling that they have, that they've accomplished something, that they've done something that most people may go through their entire lives and never doing. And so they help spread that word, that, oh, this is for everybody. Or when I go to a reading and I'm telling stories about where the poem comes from, and they realize, oh, he didn't go out into the wilderness and wait for the muse to strike him or the poetry gods to tap him on the shoulder to complete his poem. No, he was sitting in a Burger King thinking about his sister, and he wrote this poem. You know, because there's something earnest and honest in the origin of poems that for a long time, and you know, as people who have flirted with the academy, you know, a lot of the academy has sort of created this elitism about, you know, not just with poetry, but with a lot of art. And in the last 20 years, you really feel like people are taking the art back. Seeing poetry festivals, seeing art in the streets, seeing more and more people are being published now that completely inclusive, whether it's gender, race, origin, sexual orientation, national origin. More and more international poets are being published in what have been traditionally American literary magazines. You know, this is becoming, it's exciting. And it gives people an opportunity really to learn and experience through somebody else rather than feeling like they're being taught, you know, something in iambic pentameter.
Yeah.
And that's just cool to me, man, because I can't remember all that stuff anyway. I can't teach you anything.
Yeah, it's opened up. It's open,
Yeah.
And poetry is a means of opening up. The way I've seen you teach a workshop, and that's, you know, it was a workshop about place, but the way you taught it, place was just kind of a holding piece, and it was just about opening up your experiences and getting people going and saying, you can do this, you will do this by the end of the hour. And it was you know, just wonderful. It was about empowering people to write their own lives, a piece of their lives down, and it's changed over. It's not, and that's I think I usually ask at the end, what is the future of poetry? And I think you kind of answered that already. You jumped the gun. Not the shark. I was going to say shark, but not. When Daniel Wallace, the fiction writer, was here, I was going to say he didn't have to answer that question, what's the future of poetry, because he's a fiction writer, but he said, no, I'll answer it. It's limericks. So,
I love a good limerick.
yeah, but that's the other possibility.
Yeah,
It's either that it's a widening out, open field democracy. Walt Whitman would love it.
Oh, sure.
Do as you please, what you will, or limericks. Either way. Your Irish heart is singing in limericks right now.
It's going to be my next tattoo.
That's,
It's going to be a limerick.
yeah. Well, we do, I was going to, let's see, I did want to ask you about, do you know what the most common word in your verse is?
Do you want me to say that on the camera?
Wait a minute. All right, so we have...
What I think my most common word
you
is?
take a guess.
Or did you do this? Did you look through it?
No, you see. Yeah, you take a guess. What do you think it is? We can always, we had Adam Vines on here before, and most of that wound up on the cutting room floor. He's terribly foul-mouthed.
Yeah, I know it happened. I think I've been really good. I've tried. It was about 5 times where I was like, no, I can't say that. No, I didn't actually. Yeah, I was going to say or I think one of those. I know you wouldn't be able to air that.
Most
but
public appearances, you talked about at the Conroy Center. It was, for years
I asked
running,
people.
It was
I had
that.
I had people think about Pat's, and then the following year asked them to think about mine.
Sequence of vasectomy poems.
So, I'd say
that would be a safe guess.
I would think maybe teeth. Maybe is teeth's one.
That's close. That's close. It's mouth. Mouth.
My wife's gonna laugh when she hears that.
Which is a good. That's a good one.
Yeah.
And especially because of what you said earlier, your mouth gets you in trouble, but it's also
but it saved me.
Speak out. It saved you, and it's you're letting your poems be your mouthpiece, and it's an open space, and it's
that's really cool to know. I didn't my Lindsay, my wife, will get a kick out of hearing that. But the truth behind it, as much as I could say that about my mouth, I was kind of my mom. I inherited it from her, and she kind of raised me to believe that the worst thing you can do when you see something that is wrong, or you see an injustice, or you see, the worst thing you can do is not say something. And I don't think she realized the monster she was creating. I know that she spent a lot of time having to go to the high school, because she'd get called in from work. That, as a parent now, I really understand that kind of sacrifice, and feel like I need to apologize to her. But I apologize to the kids a lot, because they know that that sometimes I will I'll just say something, and then I realize, and I'm like, oh man, I probably shouldn't have said that. But poetry really has kind of helped me think a lot more about what's going to come out, and that, I think, the discipline that it takes to write, the discipline it takes to read, the guts it takes to read, when I'm teaching, when I'm really working with young writers, that's one of the things that I want them to really know is, like, don't be afraid to speak out, but you do need to be prepared that what you say there's going to be a reaction, and if you're willing to deal with that full on, then okay. But we're getting older, so I'm kind of running out of things to blame. I can't say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't know any better. 47 years old, I should know better. But I think that's what keeps us young and alive. running our mouths, saying bad words. You know.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's silence festers, and speaking out, the mouth is good. It's hopefully it's connected to the brain, as you were saying.
Hopefully.
And, you know, Wordsworth, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of emotion recollected in tranquility. But hopefully, yeah, it not you know who listens to him, but there's a lot of spontaneous overflow of emotion. Hopefully, there's some tranquility and some distance, and poetry does kind of give us some distance and control. We hope.
Sure.
Over those, but again, that Celtic curve, you know, that there is some cantankerousness and some spontaneous overflowing going with the emotions, but
Yeah.
you know, poetry can help with that too.
Sure,
I think,
sure.
and that's a good guide. Speaking of which, would you mind reading a poem for us on camera?
No, I don't mind reading a poem at all.
You're a great reader as well, and you do this. I mean, your schedule is packed. Teaching schedule, University of South Carolina, Sumter, but also going around the state barnstorming for writing and poetry, the state and elsewhere, but doing tons of readings all the time out on the road.
I mean, I'll tell you, Dan, I love every single aspect of it. I mean, I love teaching. I love where I work. I love the people I work with. You know, I live in Lexington, but I teach in Sumter, so it's about an hour and 15-minute one-way commute. And somebody asked me one time, like, man, doesn't that get old? Like, look, either coming or going, I love where I'm going to end up. I love being at home with my family. I love being at work with the people that I work with. They are hardworking, dedicated teachers that, you know, we teach, you know, sometimes a 4-4 load, sometimes more than that. And you're destroying the equipment over here.
Yeah, I mean, equipment
Can't take you
malfunctioning.
anywhere. But you know, it's, you know, and I have a very supportive administration there that, you know, sometimes I don't think they know quite what to do with me, but they're constantly looking for things for me because they know that, right, but they know that I'm passionate about what we're doing, and the students, that's what drives me to it, you know, and but, you know, getting out around the state and working with cool people on the board and for the South Carolina Academy of Authors, and then working at Columbia Museum of Art, which I got to tell you, I have yet to be in a place with that much energy in it. I mean, I have not met a single person in that building who does not like their job, and I don't see how they could not like their job. I mean, it is. It's a cool place to work. Joelle Ryan Cook is, you know, kind of my spirit animal in a way. She has really sort of helped me. And I guess all of this to say that I couldn't do half of the things that I do without that kind of support, whether it's at work, whether it's at home. And that's what, you know, I sleep 5 hours a night if I'm lucky, but wherever I'm going, you know, I know I'm loved, and you know, and it allows me to be able to be myself, but to also, you know, work my tail off for them. So I want to read a poem that I know I can read on air about about my experience when we first moved out to Lexington County, and I was about 6 years old. Yeah, we moved from Columbia to Lexington when my dad got transferred, and we moved out to this dirt road. You know, my dad built the house, and the people that lived next door to us, it was a farmhouse, and there was a whole bunch of farmland. It still had painted on the side of the mailbox, Jesse Dirty Boy Brown. That was the guy that lived there. And so we didn't have electricity when we moved in, and so there's no Saturday morning cartoons. And so on Saturday mornings, I'd go over to the Joy's house. Their last name was Joy, and I'd go over there, and they had rabbits in cages, bunches of rabbits, cute little white rabbits with red eyes. And so I'd go over there and I'd play with the rabbits, you know, kind of like a mice and men, you know, try not to kill the rabbits, but I'd go in there and I'd pet them and stuff. And then, and I thought it was just neat that they had all these rabbits for pets. Until one Saturday morning, I realized they were not for pets. Called Saturday mornings. To break the rabbit, hold it by its back legs and whip it forward. My neighbor has names for his. He tells me it's a myth that rabbits scream, but I don't believe him, and he yawns as he tosses a wet clump of fur on the table. Before we moved out here, this was a prairie for the woods, a track for copper tubes and tin, so the wild stayed wild before it was swallowed by cages and cotton fields, and I was apt to believe anything. It's 10 a.m., and all the good shows are over. Rabbits dangle and drip on the sandy barn floor. My neighbor tells me that rabbits can get as big as dogs, and sometimes they eat people. Turns out they don't. Rabbits don't eat people.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't be scared.
That was a nice, good turn there with some tall tale telling right at the end. But,
well, you know, when you grow up in this, I mean,
Yeah.
you get told those things, and you do. You believe everything you hear. And so, yeah, for a while there, I didn't think that rabbits actually ate people, but I did think they got as big as dogs. And that just, for whatever reason, terrified me. So,
Yeah,
like, well,
yeah.
then eat them now before they get as big as dogs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that turns around a lot of things, you know, a lot of expectations there. And especially, you know, the cute and cuddly bunnies
Yeah.
become a wet clump. And
That's what happened to me. That's, you know, I was traumatized at the age of 6, and this is what you get, America,
yeah.
right here.
Yeah, and that's, you know, it's that kind of rough, it's a rough thing, but there's also some, you know, I think there's something for hope in there. There's fear and roughness and, you know, some trauma behind
Sure,
the lines.
sure.
But there might be, you know, something for hope that you're able to respond to it in poetry.
Well, yeah, I mean, they tasted good.
Yeah. Well,
But that was very much a reality where I grew up. I mean, I grew up around farms,
Yeah.
and you know, and there was, you know, this, you know, they weren't pets to them. They were not needless, you know, that way. They were raised for a very particular reason, or, you know. And I'll tell you, the worst was ever having to clean out a chicken house. I did that once or twice, and. You know, just the fumes of it alone, you know, having to wear bandanas because it would just burn your nose. But, you know, and dead chickens everywhere. I mean, that was a horrible job. But I was in 7th grade. We had to take agriculture, and we would go to a farm, and this guy would, you know, show a bunch of, you know, 13, 14-year-old boys, you know, how do you artificially inseminate a cow. That freaked me out, you know.
Yeah.
I've never seen an arm go inside of another animal that far. That was crazy, man. But you know, you grow up around that, you realize that, you know, in the city, all of that seems very cruel. But in the country, it's not done out of cruelty. It's done completely out of necessity. You know, that's why I have respect for hunters. I'm not a hunter myself, but I have respect for that, for those who do that for food, not trophy hunting and that kind of stuff. That's stupid. But, you know, I'm more into fishing. I thought that was always fun.
Right.
But I could put them back, and then they would just live, you know. You can't shoot a deer and then, like, I just let it go, you know. So, you know, there was a certain finality to farming that it attracted me and frightened me all at the same time. And that was just with livestock. Now with, you know, growing food and stuff like that, to me was... kind of got back into that, harken back into getting a payoff or reward for putting in hard work. And then things that are out of your control can just come in and wipe it all out. So, and that's life.
Yeah. No, it's that division between the city and the country is, that's an interesting one and gets to a lot of, that shows up a lot in your work. And, so, a lot about that kind of the modern division with, and I think culture versus the past and the kind of elitism versus,
Right.
versus what we think of as elitism and modernity and all that versus, but versus this kind of backward rural culture, which is often Southern and all that stuff. But, it's lately that's kind of turned around with, maybe that was, some of that's maybe a better way to live in certain ways. We're kind of poisoning ourselves with a lot of aspects of that modern life and, city life, urban life. So even though it's not always an easy life, and it's not a pretty picture a lot, but it can be, it might be more sustainable in certain ways, more sustainable.
It seemed like the food tasted better,
Better
back
food,
then.
more cleaner food. It's possible.
Yeah, I don't recall going to a grocery store and buying produce. I mean, it seemed like there was always, jars, cans, that my mom, after we harvested out of the garden, and she canned everything, and then and then forced us to eat it. Squash, man, that's just disgusting. Forced us to eat it, but we've gotten away from a lot of that. I think tradition is an interesting sort of word, because there's parts of tradition that deserves value, and then there's parts of the traditions that we have that need to go away and die forever. And it's a complicated conversation to have, and it's a generational conversation to have. I tell my students that the worst thing the worst thing one can say is, well, that's the way we've always done it. Because that's, and I'm not saying that the way we've always done it is wrong, but if that's your response to every question, then that's a problem. And so, back then, the farming was seemed to be more earnest, but now, I mean, in fact, all the small farms that I grew up with are gone. They're part of big ag, and parts of them have become housing developments, and there's a sense of that's gone forever now. And so I feel like we can maybe I could bring some of that back in a poem, if I write about that experience. And so in a way, it's breaking from tradition, but also trying to preserve it.
I think that's a great way to put it, and that's kind of, I was having trouble, I felt I was having trouble articulating what that poem made me feel kind of viscerally, and you did a much better job of it. And that tradition and responding, there's something, it felt unnatural. And that's like the rabbit getting as big as a dog, and rabbits kill people.
Right.
They eat people. And that's, that's not right. That's unnatural. But there's something about that poem that feels unnatural. You beat a rabbit, you kill a rabbit, you beat it to death, throw it on the table. No, you don't. You keep them as little pets and grow them in. But actually, that's pretty unnatural to keep a little rabbit in a cage in your house. I mean, that's weird.
Yep.
And so it's playing with that tradition. What should we be doing with these creatures? And so, what should we keep about the tradition? What should we not keep? And it's doing a whole lot of really complex things there that makes you think. And these poems they kind of punch you. They punch you in the gut. Heart punch. And it takes a while to kind of digest, but they're also people. There's not a word in that poem that's you're not quoting ancient Greek here, and there are no footnotes here. People can. It's a meeting place. People can read that and understand it. It might take a little while to think about it, but we can get the poems. You're not trying to get all fancy on us. You're trying to invite people into this
Right.
poem
Right.
and share it. So that's important.
Mm.
Would you like to, anything else, any good words for the good of the order?
Well, I think what you guys are doing here, Dan, is really good. You know, bringing writers to the library. Bringing poets with the Tea and Poetry series. Tell you, I forgot to even have any tea. Anytime I think you bring, we talk about how poetry and art is for the people, but we can't expect the people to go to poetry and art. We have to bring poetry and art to the people for them to have it. The work you guys are doing in the libraries, in the branch system, and I see this a lot back home in Columbia with Richland library system, and then in my hometown, Lexington,
Yeah,
same thing. Bringing in writers to come in, and because what I find is that people in these towns are hungry for it. They want to meet writers. They want to know what's being written now, and especially when you bring in Southern writers or bring in writers from the state of South Carolina. Our state is so rich with writers and poets from the Low Country all the way to the Upstate. Poets and writers that are publishing nationally, internationally, getting huge, let's face it, the last 3 out of the last 6 National Book Awards were from South Carolina poets. I mean, there is something happening in this state. It's been happening in this state. And unfortunately, the only reason why people haven't known about it is because, for whatever reason, we'd call it elitism or whatever, it stayed in a box. And what the work that you guys are doing and bringing these, bringing us out to these places and getting us out around the state is vital to really the health and success of the written word in the state of South Carolina. So I appreciate that very much.
Well, we loved having you, and we had the Irish poet, now in North Carolina, Adrienne Rice today, and Molly Rice from North Carolina. And but she's originally from South Carolina, and so just a great crowd out there, big crowd, and they were just, everyone was talking about how inspired they were by it. So
yeah, that was cool.
It is awesome, and you always do just an excellent job, tip top. So it's worth coming out. You're worth the price of admission, which at a library, incidentally, is
it's
zero.
free.
So
Right.
that's fine. We'll pay you double next time. But
Sounds great.
it's a great thing to have you, Ray. And just to change the impression a little bit, would you mind switching hats?
Sure, man.
We'll see if this does anything for your image. A little fedora action. I think you can.
You think I
might
could pull
be
this
your new
off?
Look, yeah.
I like that on you, man. That looks good.
This is Fire Ant Fever for the USC Sumter Fire Ants. Maybe. We'll see if it sticks next time. If you see Ray McManus out and about. Yeah.
I'll come back in April. I'll bring you one, man.
This is what is maybe a major style change. But we got to say thank you to Heather Pelham she puts these videos together for us, films them, and then edits them judiciously to make me look less like a babbling fool than I am. And we will say thank you again to our friends of the Waccamaw Library for helping us put these events on, and thank you so much to Ray McManus for being here and sending the fray all around South Carolina building for poetry.
Thanks, buddy.
We love you.
Thanks, man. Love you too.
Come inside.